The Valtharian Empire stretched across half the known galaxy, and at its heart sat Emperor Draxon in his palace of black stone and silver light. He was everything humans weren't, nearly 8 feet tall with 4 powerful arms, skin like polished obsidian, and those eyes that glowed faint silver in the dark. His people had conquered 1,000 worlds over 10,000 years. They were patient, cold-blooded, and absolutely certain of their superiority. Humans were the newest addition to their empire. 40 years ago, Earth had been discovered and quickly absorbed into Valtharian control. Not through war exactly, the Valtharians didn't need to fight. They simply arrived, demonstrated their technology, and Earth's governments fell over themselves to join. Now humans served throughout the empire, mostly in jobs the Valtharians considered beneath them. Cleaning, cooking, basic maintenance. The work that required warm hands and didn't matter much if those hands belonged to someone who'd only lived 70 or 80 years. Claire had been working in the Imperial Palace for 2 years. She was 25, with dark hair she kept tied back and an unremarkable face that helped her blend into the background. That was the key to surviving as a human in the palace. Be useful, be invisible, and never draw attention. She cleaned the private quarters in the eastern wing, polished floors that didn't need polishing, and arranged flowers that no one really looked at. The night everything changed started like any other diplomatic function. The Valtharians were celebrating some treaty with the Corvati delegation, another species that served the empire. Claire worked in the back halls, staying well away from the festivities. She'd learned that drunk Valtharians weren't dangerous exactly, but they became unpredictable, and unpredictable was bad for humans who wanted to keep their jobs. Around midnight, one of the Emperor's personal attendants found her. The Emperor requires service in his private chambers. Immediately. Claire's stomach dropped. In 2 years, she'd never been summoned to the Emperor's personal rooms. Those were serviced by senior staff, not a nobody like her. But you didn't question a direct summons. She followed the attendant through corridors she'd only glimpsed before, each one more luxurious than the last, until they reached a door that seemed to be made of solid starlight. The attendant left her there. Claire knocked, heard a voice say something in Valtharian, and entered. The room was dimmer than she expected, lit by those strange floating orbs the Valtharians used instead of lamps. Emperor Draxon stood by the window, looking out at the city below. He didn't turn when she entered. "The table needs clearing," he said in perfect English. His voice was deep, with that resonant quality all Valtharians had. The attendants forgot. Claire saw a low table with empty glasses and what looked like fruit from 6 different worlds. She moved quickly, gathering everything onto a tray. The Emperor still hadn't looked at her. She should have been relieved, being invisible was safe. But something felt off. The Emperor's usual perfect posture was slightly relaxed, one hand braced against the window frame. "You're human," he said suddenly. "Yes, Your Majesty." She kept her eyes down. "You're always cold, aren't you? Your species." It wasn't really a question, but Claire answered anyway. "We run warmer than Valtharians, actually. Our body temperature is higher." Now he turned to look at her, and Claire saw what the attendant had been too afraid to mention. The Emperor had been drinking Carvathol, the ceremonial wine that Valtharians only consumed during major celebrations. She could smell its strange sweetness in the air. "Warmer," he repeated, like the concept fascinated him. He moved closer, and Claire fought every instinct telling her to step back. "You didn't retreat from the Emperor. Your people feel everything so intensely. Pain, pleasure, fear. You burn through your short lives like stars." "I suppose we do, Your Majesty." He was very close now. Close enough that she could see the silver markings on his face weren't tattoos but actually part of his skin, channels of light beneath the surface. His eyes were fixed on her face with an intensity that made her heart race. "What's your name?" "Claire, Your Majesty." "Claire." He said it carefully, like he was learning a new word. "You're afraid of me." "Yes, Your Majesty." "But you're still here." One of his 4 hands reached out, not touching her but close enough that she could feel the coolness radiating from his skin. "Your species is remarkable that way. Fragile but stubborn." What happened next was something Claire would replay in her mind 1,000 times, trying to understand it. The Emperor, with his iron control loosened by ceremonial wine, seemed fascinated by the warmth of her skin, by the way her pulse jumped at her throat, by everything that made humans so different from his ancient, cold people. And Claire, terrified but also strangely drawn in, didn't run when she should have. It was brief, confusing, and absolutely forbidden. When it was over, Claire left the room in a daze, her mind unable to process what had just happened. She went back to her small quarters in the servants' wing and lay awake until dawn, watching the alien sun rise over the capital. The next morning, she was reassigned to the western wing without explanation. She never saw the Emperor again. Not for months. 3 months passed in a blur of routine. Claire cleaned rooms, polished surfaces, and tried to pretend that night had never happened. She'd been moved to the western wing where she rarely saw anyone important, just other servants and the occasional minor official. It was better this way. Safer. She could fade back into invisibility where she belonged. Except something was wrong. At first, she thought it was stress. She'd been tired, nauseous in the mornings, dizzy when she stood too quickly. The palace physician who treated human staff gave her some vitamins and told her to rest more. But the symptoms didn't go away. They got worse. Then she missed her cycle. And missed it again. Claire sat in her tiny room, staring at the medical scanner she'd borrowed from another maid. The readout was in Valtherian script, but she'd learned enough to work in the palace. The symbols were clear. Pregnant. 12 weeks. It was impossible. Everyone knew humans and Valtherians couldn't produce offspring together. They weren't even close biologically. Valtherians were cold-blooded, had 4 hearts, processed oxygen differently. The genetic gap was too wide. Scientists had studied it when humans first joined the Empire. Cross-species relationships happened occasionally, but they never resulted in children. Never. Claire spent a week in denial, then panic, then a strange kind of numbness. She couldn't tell her fellow servants. They'd either think she was lying or call her crazy. She couldn't go to a hospital. They'd ask questions she couldn't answer. And she definitely couldn't just disappear. Humans who left their positions without permission lost their citizenship status. There was only one option, no matter how terrifying. She had to tell him. Getting an audience with the Emperor was nearly impossible for someone like Claire. She filed a formal petition through the proper channels, which could take months. But desperation made her bold. She found one of the senior human administrators, a woman named Rita who'd worked in the palace for 20 years. "I need to speak with the Emperor," Claire said. "It's urgent. Personal." Rita looked at her like she'd grown a second head. "Personal? Girl, the Emperor doesn't do personal audiences with maids. Whatever your problem is, take it through normal channels." "I can't. Please. I just need 5 minutes." Something in Claire's face must have convinced her, because Rita sighed and made some calls. 2 days later, Claire was informed she'd been granted an audience. Not a private one. A formal petition hearing in the lesser throne room, where the Emperor heard requests from palace staff once a month. The throne room was smaller than the grand hall but still impressive, with high ceilings and walls that seemed to be made of captured starlight. About 30 people waited in line ahead of Claire, mostly Valtherians with complaints about pay or scheduling. The Emperor sat on a raised platform, looking bored and distant, flanked by 6 advisors and twice as many guards. Claire's hands shook as her turn finally came. She walked forward and knelt as required, keeping her eyes down. "Speak," one of the advisors said. She'd rehearsed this 100 times, but now all her carefully planned words vanished. "Your Majesty, I'm Claire. I worked in the Eastern Wing. I served you 3 months ago during the Corvati celebration." Draxon's expression didn't change. If he recognized her name, he gave no sign. Claire forced herself to continue. "Something happened that night. Between us. And now I'm pregnant. I know it seems impossible, but the medical scans confirm it. I'm not asking for anything except help understanding what's happening to me." The throne room went completely silent. Every eye turned to stare at her. Then someone laughed. One of the advisors, a female Valtherian with elaborate silver jewelry, actually laughed out loud. "This is absurd," the advisor said. "Your Majesty, this human is clearly delusional or attempting some kind of fraud. Cross-species conception is biologically impossible. It's been proven beyond doubt." Draxon's face remained carved from stone. When he finally spoke, his voice was cold enough to freeze. "I have no memory of this servant. The Corvati celebration involved hundreds of staff. If she is pregnant, she should look to her own species for the father." Claire felt like she'd been slapped. "Your Majesty, I swear I'm telling the truth. That night." "Enough." Draxon's voice cut through her words like a blade. "You dare to make such accusations in open court? To claim intimacy with the Emperor based on nothing but your own word? This is either delusion or a calculated attempt at blackmail." "I'm not trying to blackmail anyone. I just want to understand." "What you want is irrelevant." One of the male advisors stepped forward. "The biological facts are clear. What you're claiming violates every known law of genetics. Either you're lying about the encounter, lying about the pregnancy, or you've been with a human male and are trying to blame the Emperor. More laughter rippled through the watching crowd. Claire felt tears burning her eyes but refused to let them fall. She looked directly at Draxon, searching for any sign of the person who'd been in that dim room 3 months ago. But his face showed nothing. No recognition, no doubt, nothing but cold imperial disdain. Your Majesty, please. This audience is concluded, Draxon said flatly. Guards, escort this human out. She is to be relieved of her palace duties immediately. Provide her with standard severance compensation and ensure she leaves the grounds by sunset. 2 guards moved forward. Claire wanted to scream, to fight, to make them understand. But what was the point? No one would believe her. The Emperor himself had just called her a liar in front of his entire court. As the guards led her away, she heard the whispers starting. Crazy human. Trying to trap the Emperor. Should be charged with false accusation. The advisors were already moving on to the next petition as if she'd never existed. Rita found her an hour later while she was packing her few belongings. The older woman's face was sympathetic but resigned. I'm sorry, Claire. I don't know what you thought would happen, but accusing the Emperor of something like that. You're lucky they're just letting you go with a pension. I wasn't lying, Claire said quietly. It doesn't matter now. The palace administrator arranged a small apartment for you in the human quarter. The pension will cover basic expenses. Try to build a life there and forget about all this. Claire took the address and left the palace that evening, carrying everything she owned in 2 bags. She didn't look back at the gleaming towers. She had bigger problems now. In 6 months, she'd be giving birth to a child that everyone in the Empire insisted couldn't exist. A child whose father had just publicly denied her and destroyed her reputation. She was completely alone, carrying an impossible baby, with no idea what would happen when the truth finally became undeniable. The human quarter of the capital wasn't terrible, but it wasn't the palace either. Claire's apartment was small, 2 rooms on the 3rd floor of a converted building that had probably been storage once. The walls were thin enough that she could hear her neighbors arguing, and the heating never quite worked right. But it was hers, and the pension covered rent and food. That was more than many humans had. The pregnancy progressed in ways that confused every doctor Claire saw. She'd gone to a human clinic in the 2nd month after leaving the palace, desperate for answers. The doctor, an older man named Harris who'd been practicing for 30 years, ran every test he had. Your hormone levels are off the charts, he said, frowning at his scanner. And the fetus is developing faster than normal. You're measuring about 6 weeks ahead of where you should be. Is something wrong with the baby? I don't know. The readings are strange, but not necessarily dangerous. The child seems healthy, just different. Have you been exposed to any unusual radiation or chemicals? Claire couldn't tell him the truth. She tried once, mentioned that the father might not be human, and the doctor had looked at her like she was insane. After that, she kept quiet and just listened to his instructions. Rest more. Eat protein. Take these vitamins. Come back in 2 weeks. The baby grew fast. By month 5, Claire looked 8 months pregnant. By month 6, she could barely walk without help. The child inside her was strong. Sometimes she'd feel movements that seemed impossible, like the baby was pushing with more force than a human infant should have. Once, she swore she saw a handprint against her belly from the inside, but it had too many fingers. She made one friend in those months. Lauren lived down the hall, a young woman who worked at a factory that manufactured components for Valtharian technology. Lauren didn't ask too many questions, just brought Claire food when she was too tired to cook and sat with her during the long, lonely evenings. You never talk about the father, Lauren said one night. He's not in the picture. His loss. This baby's going to be loved either way, right? Claire put her hand on her enormous belly. Right. The labor started early one morning, 3 weeks before her due date by human calculations. The pain was intense, worse than the doctors had prepared her for. Lauren called for transport, and they rushed to the clinic as Claire gripped the seat, trying to breathe through contractions that felt like they were tearing her apart. Dr. Harris took one look at her and called in his entire staff. The baby's coming fast. Too fast. Get her to the delivery room now. The next hours were a blur of pain and pressure. Claire had taken the childbirth classes, read all the materials, but nothing prepared her for this. The baby was larger than a normal human infant, pushing harder, coming faster. The medical staff kept exchanging worried glances. I need you to push, Harris said. One more time. Big push. Claire pushed with everything she had left, and finally, she felt the baby slide free. The room filled with a loud, angry cry. Her son. She had a son. Let me see him, she gasped. Please. But the nurses had gone silent. They were staring at the baby in Harris's arms, and the doctor's face had gone completely white. Doctor? One of the nurses whispered. His eyes. Harris carefully cleaned the infant and wrapped him in a blanket. When he brought the baby to Claire, his hands were shaking. Claire took her son, looked down at his face, and understood immediately why everyone had gone quiet. The baby was beautiful. He had her nose, her mouth, and skin just a shade darker than normal with a faint shimmer to it. But his eyes. His eyes were unlike anything she'd ever seen. They were silver and gold, swirling together in a pattern that seemed to glow in the dim light. And in each eye, there were 3 distinct rings, like targets, each one a slightly different shade. What are those? A young nurse asked. Harris backed away slowly. Those are Valtharian imperial markers. The triple ring pattern. I've seen it in history texts. Only the royal bloodline has eyes like that. The room erupted in whispered conversation. Claire held her baby close, watching him blink up at her with those impossible eyes. He had tiny fingers, 10 of them, completely human. But when he yawned, she glimpsed something in his mouth, teeth that were just slightly sharper than they should be. This isn't possible, Harris said. He was pacing now, running his hands through his gray hair. Humans and Valtharians can't produce offspring. The genetics don't match. It's been studied. It's been proven. Well, clearly it's possible, Lauren said. She'd been standing in the corner, and now she moved closer to look at the baby. Because he's right here. Claire named him Tyler. It was a normal name, a human name. She hoped it might help him fit in somehow, though she knew even then it was a foolish hope. Those eyes made him unmistakable. Word spread faster than Claire could have imagined. By the next day, people were gathering outside the clinic, trying to catch a glimpse of the impossible baby. By the end of the week, the story had reached other districts. The human woman who'd claimed the emperor got her pregnant hadn't been lying after all. She had proof. Dr. Harris pulled her aside before she left the hospital. Claire, you need to understand what this means. Those eyes can't be faked or mimicked. In Valtharian culture, they are sacred. Genetic proof of bloodline. If the emperor sees them. He won't, Claire said quickly. We're leaving. Going off-world. Somewhere far from here. You can't run far enough. This baby is evidence of something the Empire says is impossible. They'll come for you. To study him, control him, or... He didn't finish, but Claire understood. Or eliminate the evidence. She went back to her apartment with Tyler, Lauren helping carry the bags. Claire had maybe a week, she figured, before someone important heard about the baby with imperial eyes. A week to figure out how to protect her son from an empire that couldn't afford to admit he existed. Tyler slept in her arms, his strange beautiful eyes closed, tiny hands curled into fists. He was half human, half something ancient and powerful. He was impossible. And he was hers. That night, as Claire dozed in her chair with her son against her chest, she heard footsteps in the hallway. Heavy footsteps. Multiple sets. She knew those footsteps from her time in the palace. Imperial guards. They knocked once, then the door opened. 4 guards in ceremonial armor stood in her doorway, and behind them, a Valtharian official she didn't recognize. Claire, formerly of palace service, the official said. By order of Emperor Draxon, you and the child are to come to the palace immediately. Do not resist. Claire held Tyler closer as the guards filled her small apartment. There was no point in running. Where would she go? 4 Valtharian guards could move faster than any human, and even if she made it to the street, they'd just bring more. She was trapped, and they both knew it. Can I at least pack some things for him? She asked, keeping her voice steady. Diapers, bottles, clothes? The official nodded. You have 5 minutes. Lauren appeared in the doorway, her face pale. Claire, what's happening? It's okay, Claire lied. Just go back to your apartment. Please. But. Please. Claire met her friend's eyes, trying to communicate everything she couldn't say out loud. If Lauren got involved, she'd only get hurt too. Lauren seemed to understand. She squeezed Claire's shoulder once and disappeared. Claire packed Tyler's things with shaking hands. The baby had woken up and was watching everything with those unsettling, beautiful eyes. He didn't cry. Even at a week old, he seemed to sense that something important was happening. The transport to the palace was silent. Claire sat in the back with Tyler, surrounded by guards who wouldn't look at her. They traveled through the wealthy districts where Valtharians lived, past buildings that touched the clouds, until the palace loomed ahead like a mountain of black glass and silver light. But they didn't take her to the throne room or any of the public spaces. Instead, she was led through private corridors she'd never seen before, deeper into the heart of the palace. They stopped at a door that seemed to be made of solid darkness. The official knocked once and opened it.
Inside.
The Emperor is waiting. The room beyond was smaller than Claire expected, almost intimate. It was some kind of private study, with walls lined with screens displaying star charts and reports. And standing by the window, backlit by the alien sun, was Emperor Draxon. He looked exactly as she remembered. Tall, imposing, with 4 arms held in that characteristic Valtharian posture of absolute control. But when he turned to face her, Claire saw something in his expression she'd never seen before.
Uncertainty.
"Leave us," Draxon said to the guards.
"All of you. Wait outside.
"No one enters without my command." The guards and official filed out. The doors sealed with a soft hiss, and suddenly Claire was alone with the Emperor and their son. The silence stretched out, heavy and uncomfortable.
"Show me," Draxon said finally.
His voice was different without the court watching, less cold, more careful. "Show me the child." Claire's first instinct was to refuse, to protect Tyler from the man who denied them both. But that would accomplish nothing. She carefully adjusted the blanket so Tyler's face was visible. Draxon moved closer, 2 steps, then stopped as if hitting an invisible wall. From where he stood, he couldn't see clearly. He took another step, then another, until he was close enough to look down at the baby in Claire's arms. When his eyes met Tyler's, everything changed. The Emperor stood frozen, all 4 arms going rigid. He stared at the baby with an expression Claire couldn't read. Shock, definitely, but something else too. Something deeper. For a long moment, the only sound was Tyler gurgling softly, completely unafraid of the towering figure above him. "The triple ring," Draxon whispered. He switched to Valtharian, words Claire didn't understand, then back to English. "The pattern of the imperial bloodline. My father's eyes. My grandmother's eyes." He looked at Claire, and for the first time, she saw real emotion on his face. "Fear. This is impossible." "I tried to tell you that 3 months ago," Claire said quietly. "You called me a liar. Because it is impossible. Our scientists have studied human Valtharian genetics for decades. The DNA structures don't align. The reproductive systems are completely incompatible. There are 4 to 7 reasons this cannot happen." He gestured at Tyler. "And yet here he is." "Here he is," Claire agreed. Draxon began to pace, his movements agitated in a way she'd never seen from any Valtharian. "Do you understand what this means? If I acknowledge him, I admit to breaking the most fundamental taboo of our society. Mixing bloodlines with a species we consider inferior. My political enemies will use this to destroy me. The noble houses will call for my removal. The empire could fracture. And if you don't acknowledge him? Then I deny what these eyes prove beyond any doubt. I lose all credibility and honor. In Valtharian culture, denying genetic proof is worse than any crime." He stopped pacing and looked at her. "There's a third option." Claire's arms tightened around Tyler. "What option?" "If the child and his mother were to disappear. If there was no evidence. If this impossible thing simply ceased to exist." He said it flatly, watching her reaction. "You'd kill your own son?" Claire couldn't keep the disgust from her voice. "I would become a kinslayer. The absolute worst crime in our culture. The one act that would strip me of all honor and position." Draxon moved to the window, staring out at the city. "Every choice destroys me. That's what you've brought me, human. An impossible problem with no solution." Tyler made a small sound, and Claire looked down at him. He was watching her face with those strange eyes, seeming to study her expression. Despite everything Valtharian about him, the way he looked at her was pure human baby. Needing her, trusting her, loving her without understanding what love meant. "I didn't bring you anything," Claire said. "You did this. That night, you chose to cross that line. I was just trying to survive, and now I'm trying to protect our son. So here's what I think. I think you're scared because for the first time in your long life, you can't control something. You can't make this fit into your perfect imperial order. You dare speak to me like that? What else can you do to me? I've already lost everything. My job, my reputation, my safety. The only thing I have left is Tyler, and I'll die before I let you take him. She stood up, facing the Emperor directly. You want a solution?
Let us go.
Give us transport off-world, somewhere far from here. Let us disappear, and you'll never have to see us again. Your empire stays stable, and my son gets to live.
Draxon turned from the window. You'd run?
Hide for the rest of your life. For him?
Yes.
Without hesitation. The Emperor stared at her for a long moment. Then he did something that shocked Claire completely. He laughed. It was a short, bitter sound, nothing like human laughter, but genuine. You would give up everything for a child barely a week old. Your species is so strange. You feel so intensely, care so deeply, even when it's illogical. He moved closer again, looking down at Tyler. May I hold him? Claire hesitated. Every instinct screamed not to hand over her baby to the man who just discussed making them disappear. But she saw something in Draxon's face that made her pause. Curiosity, maybe. Or longing. The look of someone who wanted to understand something beyond his grasp. Slowly, carefully, she held Tyler out. Draxon took him awkwardly with two of his forearms, clearly unused to holding infants. Tyler looked tiny against the Emperor's chest. The baby stared up at his father with those impossible eyes, and Draxon stared back.
He's warm, the Emperor said softly. So warm.
Like holding a small star. That's how humans are.
And he has your courage.
I can see it already, even this young. Draxon's voice had changed completely, lost all its imperial coldness. What did you name him? Tyler. Tyler. He said it carefully, like he was learning something precious. A human name for a child of two worlds. They stood there in silence, the three of them, as the alien sun moved across the sky outside. Claire watched the Emperor hold their son and wondered what he was thinking. What calculations were running through that ancient, complex mind. Finally, Draxon spoke. I've made my decision. Claire's heart hammered as Draxon carefully handed Tyler back to her. The Emperor moved to his desk, placing all four hands on its surface, looking down at star charts and reports he probably wasn't really seeing. The silence felt like it lasted forever. I'm going to acknowledge him, Draxon said finally. Publicly. As my son and heir to the Valtherian Empire. Claire nearly dropped the baby. What? You heard me correctly. Draxon turned to face her. Tomorrow, I will summon the High Court and announce that Tyler is my son. That a human woman carried the next emperor of our people. That everything we thought we knew about genetics and compatibility was wrong. They'll never accept it. You said yourself. They'll try to destroy me. Yes. Draxon's expression was calm now, like he'd moved past fear into certainty. The noble houses will call for my removal. Some will claim the child is a trick or genetic manipulation. Others will demand his death to preserve the purity of the bloodline. There will be attempts on all our lives. Then why do it? Claire clutched Tyler closer. Why not just let us go like I suggested? Because I stood here holding him, and I realized something. The Emperor moved closer. For 10,000 years, my species has been stagnant. We conquered the galaxy and then stopped growing. We perfected our technology, extended our lives, eliminated disease and weakness. And in doing so, we eliminated something essential. We became cold, logical, unchanging. We lost the ability to adapt. He gestured at Tyler. That child shouldn't exist. By every law of biology and genetics we understand, he's impossible. But he's here, alive, healthy, carrying genes from both our species. Do you know what that means? Claire shook her head. It means your species, humanity, has something we lost millions of years ago. The ability to change, to bridge impossible gaps, to create new possibilities where none should exist. That's why you only live 70 years but accomplish so much. That's why you feel everything so intensely. Your chaos and creativity and endless adaptation, and my people desperately need that. So what, Tyler, some kind of symbol? No. Draxon's voice was firm. He's my son. But he's also proof that the Empire's understanding of itself is fundamentally wrong. If I hide him, I'm choosing comfort and stability over truth. I'm choosing the slow death of stagnation over the risk of real change. Claire looked down at Tyler, who'd fallen asleep despite all the tension in the room. What happens to us when you make this announcement? You'll be named Imperial Guardian. The honored mother of the heir. You'll have your own quarters in the palace, a staff, guards to protect you both. Tyler will be raised with full Imperial privileges and education. I don't want privileges. I want my son safe. I can't promise safety. I can only promise that I'll defend you both with everything I have. Draxon paused. I know I have no right to ask for your trust. I denied you, humiliated you, sent you away. But I'm asking anyway. Will you stay and help me raise him? It was the last thing Claire expected. Not an order, but a request. She thought about her tiny apartment in the human quarter, the life she'd been trying to build. Then she looked at Tyler and thought about what kind of future he'd have, running and hiding forever versus growing up knowing both sides of his heritage. If I stay, I make decisions about his upbringing too, she said. Not just you. He's half human, and he needs to understand that side of himself. Agreed. And I want protection for my friend Lauren. She helped me when no one else would. If your enemies come after me, they might target her too. I'll assign guards to her immediately. And if I think at any point that staying here is worse for Tyler than leaving, we go. No arguments, no delays. Draxon considered this. That's reasonable. You have my word. Claire took a deep breath. Okay. We'll stay. But not for the Empire or some political statement. For Tyler. So he can know his father and understand where he comes from. The next day, the imperial court assembled in the grand throne room. Every noble house sent representatives, along with ambassadors from allied species and high-ranking military officials. Rumors had been flying since the emperor called an emergency session. Some thought he was announcing a new war. Others whispered about a coup or assassination attempt. Claire stood in a side chamber, holding Tyler, watching through a screen as Draxon took his place on the throne. She'd been dressed in formal robes, Valtherian style but modified for human proportions. Tyler wore tiny ceremonial clothes that made him look like the smallest prince in the galaxy. Are you ready? Asked the attendant assigned to them. No, Claire said honestly. But let's do it anyway. Draxon's voice filled the throne room, amplified by technology Claire didn't understand. I have summoned you here to acknowledge a truth that will challenge everything our empire believes about itself. 6 months ago, I had an encounter with a human servant. 3 months ago, she came to me claiming pregnancy. I denied her publicly because our science says such a thing is impossible. The court began to murmur. Claire could see confusion on every face. Our science was wrong, Draxon continued. Yesterday, I met my son. A child who carries both human and Valtherian genetic markers. A child who bears the triple ring of our imperial bloodline in eyes that cannot be faked or manufactured. A child who should not exist, but does. The murmuring turned to shocked exclamations. Some nobles stood up, shouting objections. The emperor raised a hand for silence. I present to you Tyler, son of Emperor Draxon and Claire of Earth. My acknowledged heir. That was Claire's cue. She walked out into the throne room, carrying Tyler. Every eye in the massive chamber turned to stare at her. She forced herself to keep walking, head high, until she stood beside the Emperor's throne. Draxon gestured for her to show the baby's face. Claire turned Tyler outward, and even from a distance, his eyes were unmistakable. Those silver and gold rings caught the light and seemed to glow. A collective gasp went through the chamber. This is impossible, shouted a noble from the second tier. Humans and Valtherians cannot produce offspring. Yet here he stands, Draxon replied calmly. Genetic proof of what we thought impossible. Perhaps it's time we questioned our other assumptions as well. The throne room erupted into chaos. Nobles shouting, guards moving to control the crowd, ambassadors talking urgently into communication devices. Through it all, Claire stood beside the emperor, holding their sleeping son, wondering what kind of future they just created. The months that followed were difficult. 3 assassination attempts in the first year alone. Political factions forming and reforming daily. Human communities across the empire suddenly finding themselves at the center of attention, sometimes positive, sometimes violently negative. But there were victories too. Other hybrid children began appearing, not many, but enough to prove Tyler wasn't unique. Scientists scrambling to understand how adaptation worked at a genetic level. Young Valtherians questioning the rigid hierarchy they'd been born into. 5 years later, Claire stood in the palace gardens, watching Tyler mediate an argument between human workers and Valtherian supervisors. Her 5-year-old son, who could speak both languages fluently and understand both perspectives, was calmly explaining why the current system wasn't working and suggesting a better approach. Both sides were actually listening. Draxon came to stand beside her. They'd never become romantic partners, Valtherians didn't really do romance the way humans understood it. But they'd become something else. Partners in raising a child. Allies in reshaping an empire. Friends, maybe, though that word felt too small. He has your diplomatic skills, Claire said. And your stubbornness. Draxon watched his son with something that looked almost like pride. The noble houses are still calling for my removal. Let them. You've survived this long. Because of you. Because you were brave enough to tell an impossible truth. Claire smiled. Someone had to. That's what humans do. We make impossible things possible. Tyler finished his mediation and ran over, his strange beautiful eyes bright with excitement. Mom. Dad. They agreed. They're going to try the new schedule. He was half human, half something ancient and powerful. He was the bridge between two worlds. And maybe, Claire thought as she picked him up, he was exactly what the galaxy needed. Not human or Valtherian, but something new. Something better. The future was uncertain, sometimes dangerous, often strange. But it was finally, truly, moving forward. Retry Claude can make mistakes. Please double-check responses.